Hello, friends, neighbors. John, your whiskey neighbor here. Welcome down to the Nook. Time to shoot again. A little bit of bourbon and rye, and these bottles are from High West. And High West is out of Utah. They do make their own liquid, but they really came on the scene sharing their ability to source whiskey from different distilleries. And I would say they made a lot of real classic releases. For me, the Double Rye back in the day, not this one, but the one that came out with some older Barton Distillery rye in there. I think it was like a 16-year-old rye, and it just hit for me. One of my favorite ryes, and Wine and Beyond locally had one. So this is not that. This is their new release, and both of these have shown back up in Alberta. I think they've probably always been there, but they came kind of all of a sudden. I saw them in all the stores, and they were all on a promo or a sale or offer, and they were very affordable. So I thought, you know what? Classic bottle design. Why don't I buy a couple and then sip through them, get a sense of where they are, and share with you. So that's what we're going to do today. I've got the bourbon. Used to be the American Prairie bourbon, and then I've got their Double Rye. So if you have either of these or anything from High West, why don't you pour a dram and then come on back and we'll talk about this together. 3, 4. Well, thanks for coming back. As I said, we're going to talk these are their entrance core range. This is basically their bourbon and basically their rye. The first one here used to be American Prairie bourbon. It's the same approach. And this one, I believe, at least when I go to their website or read the back here, is entirely sourced. So it is some MGP and some undisclosed bourbon. Now the mash bills are a little bit interesting. I wrote it down. We've got a higher rye, that's the MGP, so that's like 21% rye, and I'll show the rest below. But then a low rye, like a really high corn, like an 84% corn. They share on this, and I assume they're both, never chill filtered, all natural color. I really still like the presentation of this bottle. I think it stands out. It's a little tall, can't fit it in all my shelves, but it's got a nice wood-based cork, tall, unique bottle, really good. And as I mentioned, the price right now is phenomenal, but it doesn't really matter if the bourbon's no good. So, a mix of a high and low rye bourbon. I don't know the proportions, and I imagine rather young. Let's go in on the nose. It's a classic bourbon nose. It's sweet, it's vanilla, it's light toffee. Maybe some of that higher rye is coming through with a little bit of spice, a little bit of peppering already on the nose. It's not heavy into oak and it's not heavy into fruits. But there is a little bit of cooked brown sugars in there, which I like. Maybe that low rye is also playing in there with some of the sugaring. It's not as sweet as a Buffalo Trace. It's not as spicy as some of Wild Turkey, but it's playing in there. It is a little bit younger or sharper or spicier than a more mellow Maker's Mark, and I think that's where they're playing in. Even though they're not a big player like the ones I just mentioned, priced-wise, they're right in there, right? We're off the bottom floor, but we're not in a special release. Let's try this one on the palate. Cheers. I'm going to say actually the palate is where this one shines. The nose is like, okay, doesn't really pull me in. But the palate here actually has a really nice coating agent. A little bit of honey sweetness, a little bit of graham cracker, a little bit of gentle cinnamon. It's a bourbon, right? So if you're coming at this as Scotch, you're going to go, that's hot cinnamon. And there's all this kind of fresh oak. But for bourbon drinkers, I think it's just, playing in there, but balanced across all of the key points that I just mentioned. We've got brown sugar, we've got a little graham cracker, which is some body, got some sweet honey coating, and then we've got a little bit of spicing into cinnamons. This, in a critique, would be rather generic, but in a celebration is great bottle presentation, and it's very tasty. I will have to say, because it was affordable and it's tasty, this has actually gone down. Like, I bought these bottles at the same time. We'll get to the rye in a minute. And I'm not saying this is like a favorite bourbon of mine, but nowadays, like I paid $33 Canadian. That's a sale. I think it sits a lot closer to almost 50 now. But But if you can get a bottle like this for that kind of price, it is something that you should consider. It's not as rich for me as Knob Creek. That's kind of my go-to sale bottle, but that's sale around 42. I know I'm talking price, and I shouldn't mix up price with review, but I have to. I'm trying to make dollars meet, and I bet you guys are too. This is a nice bourbon. Little generic, but the flavoring is really, really good. Tastes a bit young. I'd like a little more fruit in there. A little cherry would just go a long, long way. A little more richness, maybe some age would give that. I'm not sure, but it's not bad at all. And for me, this is like, it's a solid 3.5. I know it's a low rating, but it's a solid 3.5 and clearly an easy sipper. So I bought these because they're on sale, of course, but also I was deciding I wanted to talk about Double Rye again. As I said in the opener, the last Double Rye I had was actually a wanna be on pick, but had that classic old rye from Barton Distillery in there, and I really liked it. This is their Double Rye now. Well, it's always been theirs, but it is that mix of MGP and then their own distillate. Now, the MGP is classic 95.5 rye, and then their own distillate is not that. It's rye and malted rye. I can't remember the proportions, but not only is there malted rye, no barley, like not malted barley, theirs is from a pot still versus the column still that MGP is putting out. So pot stills, I feel, let you really select the flavor profile you're going for. Like you take your heads off, you don't get down into your like, then you keep your heart and you don't get down into those tails if the flavor is changing. You're tasting it as it goes, and you get to really create the kind of flavor profile you want. I don't know the ratios. Again, it's young. This is still a lot of rye, right? The 95.5 from MGP is all the rye, and then the other one is all rye. It's 100% rye, but it's malted rye and regular rye. I'll put the percentages down below. Let's talk their current Double Rye on the nose. And while this had some spice from maybe a high rye bourbon content, we are immediately in rye country, American rye country. It is grassy, it's herbaceous, it's got a little menthol in there. It's got some nice high sweetness, just high confectionery sugar sweetness, almost like icing sugar, like that kind of sweet, herbaceous nose. Let's try it on the palate. Cheers. Ryes for me are almost always cleaner in the palate. That's the case here. It's not as rich brown sugar, coating, honey, whatever. This is still kind of grassy, still sweet, but peppery, a little more rye hug in the throat here. But it finishes clean, it finishes dry, it puckers up for another sip. I better try it again. Cheers. Again, this leans into that rye bread, but herb, sweet grass, lemongrass, cracked pepper, sweet like black ball licorice candy or anise. Like it's got a bit of a licorice to it for me, for my palate. Not nearly the kind of cinnamon spice here. Instead, it's just that peppery, grassy, lemongrass, licorice. That's where I'm going. It's interesting. And when I want this profile, this is good. And as I mentioned, I got these on killer deals. Great. Even not at killer deals, I think they sit between that $45 and $50 Canadian, which right now is good for a well-presented bottle. This doesn't have the character for me that old Barton stuff did. It just doesn't, and that's it. I'm sure they really hate it when anyone talks about their rye and then makes that comment, because they can't source that anymore, and I'm sure they got it for a crazy deal. And they are now putting their own liquid in here. And I think that liquid that they're putting in here gives it a little more body than just that grass. Like, it's not pickle grass MGP, which the MGP can be sometimes. It's a little bit restrained from that. It's got a little more character. In fact, I'm almost getting a little more maraschino cherry in this than I was getting fruit notes in the bourbon. Took a long time for it to develop. If you like American ryes, with that I'm saying if you like, what would be, well, I was going to say George Dickel. I haven't had a George Dickel rye in a while, but that kind of flavor profile, a bullet rye, I think this is a must try. It really plays into that flavor profile. but it dials down a little bit of that and tries to carry into the conversation, I think, what they're getting off their pot still. I like it. I still can't get it off that about that 3.5. This is easy sipping, but a little bit forgettable. That's why it's easy just to like, man, I got so much choice. Let's have a little bourbon while I'm thinking about that. That's where this place. This is if you're really going for a rye. You know, if you like American ryes, it almost sits at 3 3/4. It's a decent rye. It's just very much in that profile. And if you don't like that, and if you add water to it, it even goes more that way. Just tougher to recommend in a way, but I kind of like them both. And I like the way they look. And I don't know, I have maybe not an affinity, but I've liked High West for a while. Thanks for joining me here. What are your thoughts? Do you like the new Double Rye? How do you compare it to their older releases? Do you like their bourbon, their American Prairie bourbon? Does it sit on the shelf? Is it your mixer? Where do you go with it? Thanks again for joining me here. Hope your guys' weekend is going well. Catch you on the next one.